All right, guys, so we're going to be using NextAuth for authentication, which is a fantastic package. You can use so many different providers. So we'll be using Google, but if you go to the documentation and then providers, you can see there's just a ton of them. All right, so what we want to do in this video is basically create our provider array and implement the Google provider. So if we click on Google, which is right here, actually, I'm already on the page. So we want to basically import the Google provider. We need to pass it into the providers array and add our client ID and secret, which we already have. We did that in the last video. And then there's some other options that we need to add. And then we can add our callbacks for when we sign in and when we create a session. Okay, when we sign in, we're going to want to save the user to the database if they're not already saved, because we want the user's email, the image, the Google image that they use, and stuff like that, so they can navigate around the site. All right, now the way that we're going to do this, let's go to Get Started actually. So of course we need to install NextAuth. So let's say npm install next-auth. And then everything basically kicks off at this route. Now this example and most of the examples in the documentation use the older pages directory, as you can see right here, pages/API. We're using the app directory, which is a little different. Instead of doing this brackets nextauth.js, it's going to be brackets nextauth as a folder and then route.js, because that's the convention for the app folder. All right, and then inside there is where you want to set up your provider and all your auth options. Although what we're going to do is create a separate file for this auth options object, because we need to use it later on in other places when we want to get the session on the server. So it's easier if we just put it in its own file. All right, I know that sounds confusing, but we'll just go through it step by step. So first off, let's go to app and then API, and then we want to create a folder called auth. Okay, so basically in here, NextAuth is going to take over, because we're going to create that folder called brackets ... It's a catch-all, so next auth, and then inside that we're going to create a route.js. If you're using the pages directory for some reason, then you want to create the nextauth.js file rather than the folder and the route.js. All right, now before we do anything here, this auth options, we're going to put that in a separate file. So that I'm going to put that in the utilities folder. So let's create auth options.js there. Okay, and then this is going to have the Google provider. We're going to bring that in just like we just saw in the docs. So Google provider, and that's going to be from next-auth slash, what is it? No, it's slash providers slash Google, I think. Oh, this is GitHub. Oh, that's because we're still on getting started. Let's go back to the Google page. I mean, it's pretty much the same no matter what. You're still bringing in the provider and you're going to add it to that array. So yeah, we're bringing in the Google provider, and then we'll have the, actually we'll just type this in because it's going to be a little different. What we're doing here, since we're in a separate file, is we're going to export the auth options object. So we want to set that. Then we have providers, which is going to be that array. And then in here we have our Google provider, which is going to take in an object. And that object is going to have our client ID and secret. Okay, make sure that these two, Google Client ID, Google Client Secret, match what you have here in your .env. Then we need to add a couple more options. So this right here, this authorization object with the params. So I'm going to grab that. You can either copy it from that or you can type it in, but that's going to go right under the secret. So we'll put a comma there, paste that in. What this is going to do is make it so that when we click on the login here, we can choose a Google account. if you don't add that, what's going to happen is you can choose a Google account the first time, but then every time you click it after that, it's going to try to use that same account. So if you want that functionality, then you don't have to add this. But if you want to keep logging in as different users to test, which is what I want to do, then you do want to add this object. All right, then we want to add a place for our callbacks. So under the providers array, which ends here, we're going to add callbacks. And callbacks is going to be an object of functions, and we're going to have two. So the first one is going to be invoked on successful sign-in. And we're going to say async sign-in, which is going to take in an object, and we want profile. All right, and then I'm not going to write the functionality for this right now, but I will put the steps in what we are going to do. So first, we're going to connect to the database. Second, we're going to check if the user that's logging in exists. Third, if not, then add user to database. And then we want to return true to allow the sign-in. Okay, so those are the steps that we want to do later on. And then we're also going to have another callback that modifies the session. Let's just say modify the session object. So let's say async session, which is going to take in session. And what we're going to do here, again, I'll just put some comments. We're going to get the user from the database, so the user that signs in, and then we want to assign the user ID to the session. Then we want to return that session. Okay, so those are the two functions that we want, and that's all we really have to add here for now. So back in the next auth route, the one we created here, we want to import the auth options that we created. So auth options from the utils file. And then we also want to import next auth from next auth/next. All right, and then all we're going to do here is create a handler function. We're going to set that to next auth, and then we need to pass in the auth options. Now I want to export that function whether it's a GET request or a POST request. So what we can do is export an object where we say handler as GET, and then a comma, and then handler as POST. And that's all we need to do for this file. So we've created our auth options, brought in our Google provider. It's not going to do anything yet because we need to basically wrap our application in that provider so that we can use it within components. So that's what we're going to do in the next video.